I've read some of your Paul McGrath stuff, and first of all, I am intrigued by a guy living in Wyoming that is infatuated with New York City. We'll leave it start with that. But are you still writing that line?
I am in the background. I mean, my time at the moment is pretty much, sort of 110% taken up with Reacher, but I'm still, the Paul McGrath series was what I was working on when the Reacher opportunity cropped up, and so really, I'm not done with it. I was really enjoying doing it, and I've got more ideas for it, and I'm working in the background on another one, and I'd love to do more as well in that series. So I'm hoping that the opportunity will come along.
Um, and any well, you made it. You obviously Reacher pretty much is consuming you now. What's new coming in Reacher?
Well, we've got a new one coming out in October called Chain Reaction. And then I'm currently working on the one that will be coming out next year, which the title we're still talking about. So, Reacher's still up to his usual, he's having his usual adventures. But it was a lot of fun for me writing the Paul McGrath. It was, as you say, set in New York, and yeah, interesting that I did wind up in the middle of nowhere. I before Wyoming, I lived in Chicago, and my brother was living in New York. He was really committed to New York. It was kind of in his blood, and he could understand. When I moved to Wyoming, he thought I'd lost my mind and gone completely insane. But he could understand Chicago. He would look at it as a kind of slightly less good version of New York, but he would appreciated it as a world-class city. And, you know, I do love big, busy, world-class cities. I was born in a city. I love cities. I always, until we moved to Wyoming, I never imagined living anywhere other than a city. And it wasn't that we fell out of love with Chicago. Still love Chicago. If I was going to live full time in a city again, I'd be delighted if it was Chicago. But it was just time for a new chapter. Some of the things that we were doing, our kids were at university. We didn't need to be near good schools or anything like that. And as you know, as you were describing about, the cabin, being remote is actually a really good place to work. There's fewer distractions, there's less things happening that can pull you off track. And so it was good from a work point of view as well. But yeah, when I first, my brother moved to the States before I did. He moved to New York, so that was really my first full exposure to the United States. And in a way, it's easy to view New York as, okay, obviously geographically it is in the United States, but it almost stands alone. It's something that has a kind of international aspect. And so as a setting for novels, it's perfect because pretty much everyone everywhere who reads has got some kind of an idea of what New York is all about. Nobody knows really what Wyoming is about, but everybody knows what somewhere like Chicago or New York has. And when I started to do, when I started to write the Paul McGrath, a little bit like it kind of rang a bell when you were talking about sitting with your friends in the cabin, seeing what they were reading, and trying to figure out, well, what is it that attracts people to certain kind of books? And what I thought was there's a way in which you have certain kind of archetypal characters that have been around really forever. We might have certain ideas of them based on our own cultures and our own times. But if you look a bit broader, you realize they've always been around. There's a way in which Reacher is really just the current version of the knight-errant character, the sort of
Yeah.
the guy who wanders the land, arrives in a remote place, fixes a problem and leaves. That is a version of that story, every culture, every society, every place. And so I thought, okay, well, what I need to do is figure out how to sort of reinvent or reinvigorate one of these archetypes. And one of the archetypes that I've always been fascinated with is Robin Hood. When I was a kid, I would always love the Robin Hood movies and TV series, and I had a whole series of Robin Hood books when I was a kid, and I just loved them. And so, again, Robin Hood is an archetype that there's a version of him in many, many different societies and cultures. The idea of having someone of noble background who has generally been abroad on a foolish mission, has been disgraced, and then has to come back and in anonymity has to redeem themselves. And that anonymous aspect really interested me for some reason. And the idea that what he was doing is working to help the little guy. He's not out there as a mercenary who is helping the oligarchs get even more millions. He's the guy who's out there helping the little guy who's being shafted. And so that really appealed to me. Those two, the fact that it was an archetype, I was hoping that people would resonate and people would respond to that archetypal nature of the character. And I love the idea that he was a person working to help others, not promoting himself and not doing it to help the people who were already doing okay. He was doing it for the people who otherwise were just going to get steamrolled. And so that's what I wanted to do. New York seemed like the ideal setting for it. And in order for the mechanism, you mentioned how a lot of those books that your friends were reading, they typically feature people with some kind of military background. And I think, there's different reasons for that, but one of the reasons is if you're going to have your character, this must be something I'd be interested to see how you handled this with your kind of ordinary man in extraordinary circumstances books, because oftentimes you're going to have a need for your character to have certain skills. You're going to need for him to be able to fire a gun or disarm someone who attacks him with a knife or escape from a locked room or something. So if you give him the suitable military background, you can automatically justify and explain all of these skills that he needs to carry out the story. And so I had the idea that my guy was this he had just left military intelligence, so he had that whole raft of skills. And he discovered that his father had died in mysterious circumstances. He'd been estranged with his father. He was coming home to try to make amends, but he couldn't because the father's dead. And the police thought he'd been murdered. It had gone to trial, and everything had fallen apart. So my character, Paul McGrath, he decides he wants to find out what had happened and he can't reunite with his father, but perhaps he can get justice for it. So he decides to investigate. And he knows that wherever the root of the problem was, it was in the courthouse in New York. So how is he going to find out? He's a military intelligence guy. He knows how to work undercover. So he gets a job at the courthouse as a janitor. Because if you're a janitor, you can go anywhere, you can see everything, but no one notices you. And so, in my mind, I always think of them as the janitor series, And so the idea was you have the kind of, you've got an arc which goes through a few books, which is him looking into what happened with his father. But then in each book, he will always come across someone, a little guy who's been wronged by the system or wronged by some, one percenter, and he will just quietly and anonymously step in and put it right. And what I liked about it, I had a thing going where, Paul McGrath would find out the problem, he would fix it, and he would never let anybody know that he had done it. And the last line of each book is that whoever it is that he helped will seek him out at the courthouse and say, Paul, I don't understand it. All my problems have been fixed, but I don't know who did it. You're the only one I told. Was it you? And every time he just says, how could it be me? I'm just the janitor. He's the one who cleans up. And I just was having so much fun writing those. And I think that it was, a few years have passed now because of the working I've done. It's the seventh Reacher coming out this year. But so that some time has passed, but I don't think it's actually changed much in that it felt to me, this is an idea I'd had in the back of my mind, this undercover anonymous guy, kind of like a Robin Hood, helping disadvantaged people. But it didn't seem like the right time to do it when I first started writing. But all of a sudden it was the right time, and I still think it is because, injustice in society is growing ever greater. There are, ever bigger gaps between the haves and the have-nots, and there are more and more people exploiting the rules and cheating, basically, because they have the power to do so, to help themselves and hurt other people. Helping yourself is fine, but hurting other people in the process, not so good. And if you do that, in my books, Paul McGrath or Jack Reacher is going to come and they're going to put things right.
Love it.